So what if the biological switch to turn off your body's chronic stress response isn't a prescription pad and it isn't some complex therapeutic intervention, but instead relies on a 30-second cognitive illusion?
I mean, it sounds like an infomercial pitch, frankly.
Yeah.
We are just so conditioned to believe that profound physiological changes require, equally profound, complex, and usually very expensive interventions.
Exactly. Right. And yet the data we are looking at today suggests the exact opposite. So welcome to today's deep dive. I am just thrilled you've carved out the time to be here with us because we
Mhm.
are dismantling something you have likely heard about 1,000 times, but almost certainly fundamentally misunderstand.
Yeah, we're talking about gratitude.
We are, but before you roll your eyes, because let's be honest, gratitude has been so heavily commodified. I mean, it's slapped on coffee mugs, it's cross-stitched onto throw pillows, it's a ubiquitous hashtag used by influencers.
Which is precisely the problem, really. That commodification has stripped the concept of its clinical weight. It's basically reduced a robust psychological framework into, well, a polite social reflex.
Yeah, like you hold the door for someone, they say thank you, and we call that gratitude.
Right, but that is merely social lubrication. It's entirely detached from the actual neurological mechanism we're going to explore today.
Right. And to reclaim that clinical weight, we are pulling from a really fascinating piece of source material. We've got excerpts from an audio program called The Inner Horizon, The Art of Abundance and Gratitude, specifically episode 5.
That's a great source.
It really is. In this program, the host speaks with a researcher named Bill, who has dedicated his work to studying the empirical, biological, and, psychological impacts of gratitude. And our mission today is to completely deconstruct this concept based on his findings.
You're moving it far away from that societal cliche, right?
Yeah. Exactly. We're examining it as a profound, transformative practice, a practice that the research shows literally alters human resilience, physical health, and how you experience every single minute of your day.
And the distinction Bill makes right out of the gate in the source material
Sure.
is where we really have to anchor this entire discussion. He argues that gratitude is not merely a passive feeling.
Right, it's not involuntary.
Exactly. It is not an involuntary emotional wave that just washes over you when the universe happens to hand you a favorable outcome. It is a deliberate, active tool. It's an approach to reality. He highlights the duality of gratitude as both an emotion and a practice.
I want to push on that duality for a second because I think it's where most of us get stuck. If we treat gratitude solely as an emotion, we are essentially hostage to our environment,
That's
right?
absolutely.
We were just sitting around waiting for the promotion or, I don't know, the perfect cup of coffee or the sunny day in order to feel the corresponding emotion of thankfulness. We are entirely at the mercy of our circumstances.
But when we pivot and treat it as a practice, we actually take our agency back.
Yes. That is the pivotal shift.
As a practice, it becomes a framework you apply to your circumstances, rather than just a reaction to them.
Yeah.
And what's really fascinating here is how the researcher frames the mechanics of this framework.
How does he frame it?
Well, he doesn't suggest that practicing gratitude alters the external reality.
Mm-hmm.
Your bank account doesn't magically inflate, the traffic jam doesn't just clear up.
Right. That would be magic.
Exactly. Instead, the program's host introduces this incredible concept, stating, and I'm quoting here, imagine gratitude as a lens. When you look through it, the world changes, not because the world itself is different, but because you see it differently.
Man, that concept of the lens completely reframes the objective. It's not about changing the landscape, it's about changing the optics. Let me throw an analogy at this to really ground what the source is arguing, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Think about standing on the edge of a lake on a bright summer day. The sun is just beating down and the light is reflecting fiercely off the surface of the water.
Hmm.
If you're just standing there, the glare is absolutely blinding.
Oh, yeah, you can't see anything below the surface.
Right. All you can see is this harsh, overwhelming white reflection. You can't see the water itself, let alone anything in it.
The visual field is entirely dominated by the surface tension and the light.
Exactly. But then you put on a pair of high-quality polarized sunglasses. In a fraction of a second, the entire scene shifts. Now, we have to be clear, the sunglasses did not change the lake.
They did remove the rocks.
They didn't magically remove the jagged rocks beneath the surface, right? They didn't make a school of fish spontaneously materialize out of thin air. The environment is entirely 100% identical to what it was a second ago.
But the filter is different.
Yes. That polarized lens filtered out the blinding surface glare. And because that glare is gone, your eyes can suddenly penetrate the surface. You can actually appreciate the depth, the colors, and the details that were already there, just completely hidden in plain sight.
That is a highly accurate representation of the cognitive shift Bill is describing. Because if we map that onto human psychology, the glare in our daily lives is basically our evolutionary programming.
Or negativity bias.
Precisely. Our brains have a built-in negativity bias. From an anthropological standpoint, we are hardwired to scan our environment for threats, for deficits, for what is wrong. It is a survival mechanism.
It's not a flaw, it's a feature.
It was a vital feature. The hunter-gatherer who was hyper-fixated on the rustling in the bushes, the potential predator survived. The one who was distracted by a pretty flower, well, they did not. So we inherited a brain that acts like a relentless smoke detector.
Which is great if you are dodging saber-toothed tigers, but incredibly maladaptive if you are just, sitting in traffic or scrolling through your inbox.
Exactly. In the modern world, that same survival mechanism traps us in a state of chronic dissatisfaction. It creates a perpetual glare of stress, anxiety, and perceived lack.
We are constantly blinded by the surface-level frustrations, right? Like the delayed train, the rude email, the mounting bills.
Yeah. So when the source material talks about gratitude as a lens, it's talking about an intentional, proactive cognitive filter. Choosing to wear the gratitude lens is a deliberate choice to override the brain's default evolutionary setting.
And I love that the source doesn't sugarcoat this at all. It explicitly states gratitude doesn't erase challenges, but it helps us notice the gifts hidden within them. It acknowledges the jagged rocks at the bottom of the lake.
It's very realistic.
Right. But what I find so compelling are the specific examples the author uses for these gifts. It doesn't say gratitude helps you notice your sudden promotion or your lottery winnings. The text specifically points to a kind word, a moment of laughter, a sunrise.
The focus on the micro moments is very deliberate there.
Why is that? Why not focus on the big wins?
Because why a sunrise? Why a fleeting moment of laughter? Those phenomena share a defining characteristic. They are entirely transient. They exist for a brief window of time, and then they dissipate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And if you are operating on your brain's default setting, scanning for threats and deficits, you will miss them entirely.
Yeah.
True abundance, according to this framework, is not a static state of achieving massive life goals.
It's the little things.
It is the cumulative compounding effect of noticing these tiny, transient micro-moments. It's the profound realization that these moments are constantly, relentlessly occurring around us, regardless of our broader overarching life circumstances.
I want to pause here and ask you, the listener, to really interrogate your own baseline for a second. What is your default lens right now, today?
That's a great question.
When you wake up, when you first open your eyes, or when you sit down at your desk to start your workday, are you immediately looking through a lens of scarcity?
Most people are.
Right. Like, are you instantly cataloging the emails you haven't answered, the time you don't have, the energy you're lacking, the resources that are missing? Because I will readily admit I do that. It is astonishingly easy to default to the scarcity lens.
It's the path of least resistance for our brains.
Exactly.
Huh.
But if you were to swap that out for the polarized sunglasses of abundance, what tiny transient things are occurring in your immediate vicinity right now that you are completely blind to because the glare of your stress is just too bright?
That internal audit is so crucial. Because if we accept that gratitude is a cognitive lens that fundamentally alters how we perceive our reality, we have to ask the next logical, scientific question.
Which is?
What are the downstream effects?
Yeah.
What happens to the human organism?
Yeah.
What happens to us physically and neurologically when we force ourselves to wear that lens consistently?
This is exactly where I want to steer us, because this isn't just a philosophical thought experiment, right? There is immense biological and clinical weight to this, which leads us directly to the researchers' findings in the audio program.
Bill lays out some really heavy realities.
He does. He states that research shows gratitude improves mood, strengthens relationships, and boosts physical health. Now, I have to be honest, let's unpack this, because when I first read those claims, my internal skeptic just flared up.
It sounds a bit too good to be true, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I and anyone listening can easily accept that actively looking for the good will improve your mood. That's essentially a tautology. And sure, if you're in a better mood, you're probably more patient with your partner, more collaborative with your colleagues, so it strengthens relationships. I buy that.
But the physical health claim.
Exactly. Physical health. That's where it starts to sound like pseudoscience to me. How does merely noticing a sunrise or writing down that you had a good sandwich actually translate into measurable changes in human biology? We can't pretend that thinking nice thoughts cures inflammation.
It is a completely valid point of friction. I mean, the leap from thinking appreciative thoughts to improve physical health biomarkers sounds like a massive stretch, but only if you lack the context of how the human nervous system processes the concept of lack.
Okay, lay that context on me.
Let's look at the specific clinical case study Bill mentions in the text to bridge this gap. He talks about a client who struggled with profound, debilitating depression. He instructed her to keep a daily gratitude journal, writing down just 3 things she was thankful for.
Which sounds standard enough.
Right. But the key mechanism Bill highlights isn't the physical act of writing. It is the cognitive shift in focus. He notes that the practice forced her to shift her focus from what was missing to what was present.
What was missing versus what was present. The source leans heavily on that phrasing, and it really feels foundational.
It is the absolute bedrock of the clinical impact. Let's break down the biology of missing. When the human brain is fixated on what is absent, whether that is missing money, missing affection, missing health, missing status, it interprets that absence as a survival threat.
So the brain doesn't distinguish between types of missing.
Not really, no. It operates in a psychological state of chronic lack. The brain, specifically the amygdala, signals the hypothalamus, which triggers the pituitary gland, which tells the adrenal glands to pump out cortisol and adrenaline. This is the HPA axis in action.
So the brain literally cannot tell the difference between I am missing a sense of purpose in my career and I am missing food because a famine is coming. It just registers a threat.
Exactly. The physiological response is identical. The sympathetic nervous system ramps up, cortisol floods the bloodstream.
And what does chronic cortisol do?
Well, wreaks havoc. It fragments your sleep architecture. It impairs your digestion because the body diverts energy away from the gut to prepare for a fight or flight scenario.
Right.
It raises your blood pressure. And crucially, it suppresses the immune system and triggers systemic inflammation.
Wow.
The body is relentlessly preparing for a physical crisis because the cognitive lens is constantly signaling that something vital for survival is absent.
Okay, so looking through the scarcity lens isn't just a bummer. It is an active, ongoing physical stressor. It is a biological wear and tear mechanism.
Precisely. Now look at the intervention here. Actively identifying and writing down 3 things that are present. By forcing the brain to acknowledge what is present, you are introducing contradictory evidence to that threat narrative.
Oh, I see. You're proving the alarm wrong.
Yes, you are signaling to the nervous system that you are actually safe, you are secure. There are resources available to you in your immediate environment. Even if those resources are as incredibly simple as a warm blanket, a quiet room, or a glass of clean water, the biological response is a rapid downregulation of the stress response.
So you're hitting the brakes on the HPA axis.
You are engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest network. When you do this consistently, heart rate variability improves, which is a key indicator of cardiovascular resilience. Inflammatory markers in the blood can actually decrease over time because they aren't being constantly provoked by stress hormones.
Wait, really? The inflammation actually goes down just from this shift?
Yes, because the immune system functions optimally when it's no longer being suppressed by chronic cortisol. That is the bridge. That is how the proactive cognitive framework of gratitude translates directly, empirically, into physical health. It is fundamentally a biological off switch for chronic stress.
That makes profound sense when you frame it around the nervous system's interpretation of safety versus threat. But I want to linger on this specific client with depression for a minute because it is very easy for us to sit here and scientifically map out the parasympathetic nervous system, but we cannot gloss over how insanely difficult this intervention must have been for her in practice.
It's incredibly difficult.
Right. When you are in the thick of clinical depression, the lens isn't just glaring. It feels like someone took a can of black spray paint to the polarized glasses. Everything feels dark, heavy, exhausting, and utterly pointless. Asking someone in that state to just find 3 things to be grateful for feels almost insulting, if not outright cruel, if you don't understand the underlying mechanism.
It's a Herculean task. I mean, it is the mental equivalent of asking someone with severe muscle atrophy to suddenly run a sprint. The cognitive pathways for noticing abundance are essentially withered away, while the pathways for noticing despair are thick, reinforced, and firing constantly.
To use a different analogy, it's not like she just had a broken leg and needed a crutch. Depression is like being trapped in a room with a radio that is blaring nothing but harsh, deafening static.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
The static is the narrative that everything is broken, everything is missing, everything is hopeless. The gratitude journal isn't a magic wand that unplugs the radio. It is the agonizing, microscopic process of reaching out and turning the tuning dial a millimeter at a time, searching for a faint frequency, a tiny signal of something, anything that isn't static.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it,
Yeah.
actually. The static is the monolithic narrative of despair. The act of finding three things, no matter how small, is an attempt to pick up a different signal.
And the source describes it almost like a fight.
It was. The way Bill describes it in the source material, this client was essentially performing a radical act of cognitive rebellion against her own brain chemistry. Her depression was screaming at her that the environment was entirely devoid of value.
And every single night she had to fight that.
Every single night, she had to sit down, pick up a pen, and force her hand across the paper to document that, actually, some things were present. It was a daily, grueling fight to reclaim her attention from the static.
And the source notes that over time, this daily rebellion caused her sense of hope and resilience to grow stronger. The gratitude didn't cure the depression overnight. It didn't magically fix the radio, but it built the scaffolding of hope. It proved to her brain that the static wasn't the only thing broadcasting.
Rebellion is the perfect term for it. And what is so vital to understand about this specific intervention is that it relies entirely on small, undeniable truths.
What do you mean by undeniable truths?
If you are counseling a deeply depressed client, you do not ask them to write, "I am so grateful for my wonderful, perfect life, and I am so happy."
Because that's a lie.
Exactly. That is a lie. Their brain knows it's a lie, and it will reject it, creating even more dissonance and despair. Instead, you ask them to write, "I am grateful the sun came through the window and warmed my hand today," or "I am grateful the coffee was hot."
You can't argue with hot coffee.
Right. It is an undeniable empirical fact of presence. The depression cannot argue with the hot coffee, and once the brain accepts one small, undeniable truth of presence, it begins to slowly build a new narrative foundation.
You are laying down new track in the brain, which brings up a critical question: how do we actually lay that track? We've established the why. The massive clinical, physical, and psychological benefits of shifting from missing to present are abundantly clear.
Yes, the theory is solid.
But knowing how an engine works doesn't mean you know how to drive the car, you know? How does a listener actually implement this? The source material doesn't just leave us with abstract theory. It provides a highly specific, actionable toolkit.
It outlines a very practical, structured protocol for forcefully shifting that cognitive lens on a daily basis.
And I want to dive deep into these tools because the friction of actually doing them is where most people fail. The source breaks it down into 4 specific steps or practices: the daily gratitude journal, the gratitude pause, expressing gratitude, and the gratitude reframe. Let's tackle these one by one, starting with the foundation, the daily gratitude journal.
Okay, let's break it down.
The instruction from the researcher is simple. Write down 3 things you're grateful for each evening. They can be monumental or they can be microscopic. But why the evening? Why not first thing in the morning to set the tone for the day?
The requirement to perform this task in the evening is highly strategic from a neurological standpoint. It is about memory consolidation. As you prepare for sleep, your brain begins the process of sorting through the day's data, deciding what to keep and what to discard.
And our default is to keep the bad stuff, right?
Precisely. Because of our negativity bias, the default setting is to review the threats, the awkward conversation, the mistake you made at work, the anxiety about tomorrow. By forcing yourself to write down 3 positive things right before bed, you are manually intervening in that sorting process.
Wow, so you're hacking your own sleep cycle.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
You are retrospectively scanning the day's data, not for the threats, but for the moments of value. It changes the biological context in which your memories are consolidated during sleep.
You are essentially giving your brain a different set of blueprints right before the night shift construction crew clocks in. Okay, so that's the evening anchor. The second tool is what the source calls the gratitude pause.
This one is deceptively challenging.
Seriously, the text instructs us to take 30 seconds during the day to notice something positive. A smile, a meal, a moment of rest. Now, 30 seconds sounds almost laughably easy, but honestly,
It's not.
no. When I am in the middle of a chaotic Tuesday, my inbox is on fire, I'm late for a meeting, and my stress hormones are surging. The idea of stopping all my forward momentum for 30 seconds to stare at my sandwich and appreciate it feels impossible.
It feels wrong.
Yes, it feels like slamming on the emergency brake while driving 80 miles an hour on the highway.
No.
There is massive visceral friction there.
That friction you were describing is the exact target of the exercise. That resistance is your default mode network and your stress momentum trying to carry you forward on autopilot. It feels unnatural to stop because your brain is telling you that stopping is dangerous when there are threats, like unread emails, to manage.
Right, the brain thinks the email is a tiger.
Exactly. But this brings us to what I consider the most vital analogy in the entire source text. The host of the program explicitly states, gratitude is like a muscle. The more you practice, the stronger it becomes.
We hear the muscle metaphor all the time, but the source means it quite literally in terms of brain mechanics, right?
Absolutely. It is not just a poetic metaphor, it is neuroplasticity in action. Think about Hebbian learning neurons that fire together, wire together. When you go to the gym and attempt to lift a heavy weight for the first time, your muscles tremble, your form is shaky, feels deeply unnatural, and you experience physical resistance.
Yeah, you're sore.
Right. That 30-second pause to look at your sandwich when you are stressed is the mental equivalent of a heavy bicep curl. It feels clumsy, forced, and aggravating at first because those specific neural pathways, the ones responsible for pausing, observing, and appreciating, are weak and underutilized.
So when I sit there at my desk feeling slightly ridiculous and intensely restless because I'm forcing myself to appreciate a moment of quiet instead of frantically working, that discomfort isn't a sign that the practice is failing.
Not at all.
That restlessness is just the mental equivalent of Dom's delayed onset muscle soreness. It's the weakness leaving the brain. It is the literal sensation of neuroplasticity occurring.
That is precisely what it is. You are deliberately firing new neural circuits, overriding the deeply grooved pathways of chronic stress. By forcing the 30-second pause and by maintaining the evening journal, you are hypertrophying the muscle of appreciation.
You're bulking up your brain's gratitude circuit.
Exactly. You are thickening the myelin sheath around those specific neural pathways, making them faster and easier to access in the future. And you absolutely need that cognitive muscle to be incredibly strong because the next two tools in the source material require significant psychological heavy lifting.
Which brings us to tool number 3, expressing gratitude. The text says, tell someone you appreciate them. A simple thank you can strengthen connection. Now, this represents a major pivot in the practice, doesn't it?
It does. It shifts it from internal to external.
Right. The journal and the pause are entirely internal. You can do them in isolation, safely inside your own head. But this tool moves the practice into the external world. And I think we have to acknowledge the vulnerability inherent in this.
Oh, for sure. It's a huge step up.
It is one thing to quietly write in a leather-bound notebook. It is a completely different, much riskier endeavor to walk up to a colleague or sit down with your partner, look them in the eye and say, I genuinely appreciate what you did, and here is why. It requires you to lower your social armor.
It does. It requires a degree of emotional availability and a willingness to be seen. It can feel awkward, especially in professional environments that, prioritize stoicism or transactional interactions. But the neurological payoff for this vulnerability is profound. Because it initiates a biological feedback loop.
How so? What is actually happening in the brain when we bring another person into this?
When you express genuine, specific gratitude to another human being, you aren't just transmitting information. You are engaging the social engagement system, which is mediated by the vagus nerve.
Okay, so a physical nerve response.
Yes, you trigger a release of oxytocin in yourself, the bonding hormone, which further suppresses cortisol. But crucially, through mirror neurons and social co-regulation, you simultaneously trigger that same neurochemical cascade in the recipient.
Wait, really? Just by speaking to them?
Yes, you elevate their physiological state. And when you witness their elevated state, when you see their posture soften or a genuine smile break out, it reinforces your own sense of abundance. It is a shared, reciprocal, biological regulation. You are essentially syncing your nervous systems in a state of safety and presence.
You are creating a localized ecosystem of abundance. That is fascinating. But as powerful as that is, it still feels like preparation for the final tool, the heavyweight champion of this entire framework, the gratitude reframe.
This is the big one.
Both the host and the researcher in the audio program spend significant time on this concept. The specific instruction is this: when facing a challenge, a setback, or a frustration, pause and ask yourself what lesson or gift might be hidden here.
This is the pinnacle of the practice. This is the heavy deadlift. And this is exactly why the source insists you have to build the muscle with the journal and the pause first.
Because if you try this on day one, it's not going to work.
Oh, if you attempt to execute the gratitude reframe without having built up a robust baseline capacity for appreciation, the exercise will not just fail, it will backfire. It will feel patronizing and insulting to your own intelligence.
Oh, without a doubt. Let's play this out. If someone is going through a devastating divorce, or they just got unexpectedly laid off from a job they loved, or they are dealing with a severe health diagnosis, if you walk up to them in the immediate aftermath and say, well, hey, what's the hidden gift here? They are going to want to punch you in the face.
And honestly, they probably should.
Yeah, I'd hold their coat.
Rightfully so, because a weak, undeveloped gratitude muscle cannot possibly support the crushing weight of a genuine life-altering crisis. If the neural pathways for noticing small abundances aren't strong, trying to find abundance in a tragedy is an impossible cognitive leap.
It's just too heavy a weight.
Exactly. But if you have been practicing, if you have spent months strengthening your brain's ability to anchor onto what is present instead of instantly collapsing into what is missing, you can eventually approach severe adversity with a different neurological toolkit.
How does the reframe actually function in those high-stakes moments, then? Because it can't be about just pretending the bad thing isn't bad.
Exactly. The reframe is absolutely not about denying the agony of the lost job, the betrayal of the breakup, or the fear of the diagnosis. It is about having the cultivated cognitive strength to hold the pain, and yet still ask, amidst this profound difficulty, is there a lesson about my own endurance?
Finding something within the darkness.
Yes. Has this closed door forced me to look at an open window I was previously ignoring? Has this vulnerability deepened my empathy for others? The reframe is the practice of extracting value from the wreckage.
Extracting value from the wreckage, that is an incredibly powerful, gritty way to look at it. You aren't thankful for the wreckage. You didn't want the house to burn down.
Right, no one wants the fire.
But you are thankful for the raw materials, the forged resilience that you can salvage from the ashes. And that realization leads us directly into a critical boundary that the source material handles beautifully in its final section.
Yes, the caveat about pain.
Because anyone listening to this deep dive right now, particularly if they're going through a hard time, might be thinking, okay, this all sounds theoretically great, but it also sounds suspiciously like I'm supposed to just paste a smile over my trauma and pretend bad things don't hurt. We need to draw a hard line here. The researcher Bill is not advocating for toxic positivity. The source does not say, smile while your house burns down.
It explicitly and vehemently refutes that interpretation. The text states very clearly, gratitude doesn't mean ignoring pain. It means choosing to notice joy alongside it.
Choosing to notice joy alongside it. It's the simultaneous coexistence of two seemingly contradictory states.
If we pull back and look at the broader landscape of human emotional development, the capacity to hold two opposing truths at the exact same time is the defining hallmark of a mature, resilient mind.
And toxic positivity is the opposite of that.
Exactly. Toxic positivity is fundamentally a mechanism of emotional avoidance. It is a defense mechanism. It is the outright denial of pain. It is chanting good vibes only while the ship is actively sinking. It invalidates the very real human experience of suffering.
But genuine gratitude doesn't do that.
No, genuine gratitude, as clinically defined by this researcher, requires immense courage because it requires you to look directly at the pain, acknowledge its full validity and weight, and then consciously, effortlessly expand your field of vision to recognize that joy, beauty, and abundance still exist within the very same frame of reality.
It brings us right back to the polarized lens analogy we started with. Wearing the lens doesn't magically dissolve the dark storm clouds rolling in. You still see the storm coming. You still feel the drop in temperature. You still feel the wind whipping around you. The threat is real.
The lens doesn't make the storm disappear.
Exactly. But the lens filters out the blinding panic, allowing you to also see the single ray of sunlight breaking through the edge of the clouds. It allows you to see the entirety of the picture rather than being singularly blinded and consumed by the storm.
The source beautifully refers to this as having the courage to let appreciation guide the healing journey. Healing from trauma, grief, or severe stress is rarely about the total eradication of pain.
It's more about integration, right?
Yes, it is about the integration of that pain into a larger, more expansive, and more meaningful life narrative. By actively, muscularly noticing joy alongside the pain, you prevent the pain from becoming the sole-defining characteristic of your identity. You remind your nervous system and your psyche that reality remains multidimensional. Life is undeniably hard, yes, but it is also simultaneously breathtakingly beautiful.
And as the source material concludes this exploration, it notes that this rigorous daily practice of gratitude is a foundational step toward long-term resilience, inner peace, and unlocking human potential. It even leaves a breadcrumb for a future discussion, mentioning that their audio program will next be exploring compassion, extending kindness to ourselves and others.
Look as the logical next step.
Right, which, when you look at the architecture we've just mapped out, makes perfect logical sense as the next evolutionary step. Once you've successfully utilized the gratitude lens to recognize the abundance in your own immediate environment, it naturally softens your defenses.
It paves the way for a broader empathy.
It does. It paves the way for you to look at the people around you, and perhaps most importantly, to look at yourself with a far more compassionate, forgiving lens. It's as if gratitude does the hard work of clearing the abrasive static, so the clean signal of compassion can actually be heard through the radio.
That is the ultimate long-term trajectory of this practice. It almost always begins as an internal, highly individualized, perhaps even slightly selfish mechanism to improve one's own mood, lower one's own cortisol, or manage one's own depression.
Start with yourself first.
Exactly. But as the neural muscle of abundance strengthens, its focus invariably expands outward. A person who is deeply neurologically grounded in the reality of what is present becomes a steady source of stability, empathy, and compassion for the chaotic world around them.
So, to synthesize this massive paradigm shift for you, the person listening right now, over the course of this deep dive, we have surgically removed gratitude from the realm of polite social reflexes and decorative pillows. We have repositioned it as a heavy-duty, empirical, biological, and psychological tool.
It's not just a feeling.
Right. We've established that it is not an involuntary feeling you have to sit around and wait for. It is a daily, deliberate, sometimes agonizing practice. It is a polarized lens you must consciously choose to put on, especially when the glare of life is blinding.
And we gave them the toolkit.
We did. Remember the specific mechanical tools provided by the researcher bill. They aren't just suggestions. They're workouts for your brain. First, the evening journal, not just to record memories, but to fundamentally alter the neurological process of memory consolidation, shifting your brain from a state of missing to a state of present before you sleep.
And then the pause.
Second, the 30-second pause, the mental bicep curl designed to create cognitive friction, interrupt your default mode network, and build the muscle against the momentum of stress. Third, expressing thanks, the vulnerable leap from internal thought to external action, utilizing the vagus nerve and mirror neurons to create a biological feedback loop of connection and safety with another person.
And finally, the heavy lift.
And finally, the ultimate heavy lift, the reframe, the practicability to face the storm, hold the pain, and systematically extract the salvage materials of resilience from the wreckage of a challenge.
It is a remarkably comprehensive framework for fundamentally altering your subjective experience of reality, and by extension, your physiological health. But the operative word is practice.
Yeah.
It requires the daily, unglamorous discipline to consistently choose presence over absence.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over, building directly on that concept of the gratitude muscle and the friction of practice.
Yes, this raises a profound question, and it is something I encourage you to deeply consider as you step away from this audio and go about the rest of your day.
What's the question?
If gratitude is indeed a cognitive muscle, and we know from basic biology that muscles inevitably atrophy when we fail to use them, how much of our daily dissatisfaction, our chronic stress, our free-floating anxiety, or our deep sense of emptiness isn't actually a response to a genuine lack of abundance in our external lives, but is simply the painful result of a severely atrophied perspective? What if the beauty, the safety, and the gifts are already right in front of you, and you've simply lost the muscular strength to hold the lens up to your eyes?
That is a phenomenal, albeit confronting, question to carry with you today. Are you suffering from a lack of resources or a lack of cognitive muscle? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of gratitude.
It was a great discussion.
We covered an immense amount of ground today, from the evolutionary origins of our negativity bias to the endocrine system down to the neuroplasticity of a 30-second pause. The absolute best way to synthesize all of this information so it doesn't just fade into the background.
Put it into practice right now.
Exactly. Don't wait until tonight. Don't wait until tomorrow morning. As soon as this audio ends, I challenge you to try the gratitude pause. Take just 30 seconds right where you are sitting or standing. Fight through the friction of your momentum and find one undeniably present thing to appreciate. Start laying down that new neural track today. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.